Maysaa Bazna has been involved in education and alternative education for many years. She earned her doctorate in curriculum and teaching from Columbia University and was a professor in Columbia's Teachers College and the City University of New York. She has taught in the areas of learning disabilities, disability studies, and inclusive education. She is currently the Director of Professional Practice and Community Partnerships at the School of Education, Queens College, New York. In 2010, looking to create the kind of hands-on, self-directed educational experience she wanted for her child, Mesa launched Pono, an outdoor democratic education co-learning community in New York City. She continues to serve in an advisory role for Pono while also expanding her passion for outdoor education by partnering with the New York City Public Schools. Maysaa Bazna, thank you for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you for having me, Carrie.
It's great to have you here. I just think your story is so fascinating, your kind of discovery of alternative education, particularly in looking for solutions for your own child, and then your involvement in alternative education spaces for many years, while also focusing a lot on kind of partnering with conventional schools in the New York City public schools around, again, your passion for outdoor education. So we'll get to all of that, but let's start with sort of your story. What prompted you to become interested in education to begin with?
I really, really love children. I think that's the beginning of my story with education. And then I was introduced to the field of learning disabilities after I graduated from college. And I found it fascinating how all kids are brilliant in their own different ways, and how society does not really see that, or the systems in place do not appreciate that. And so we label kids, and we do all things that are not really what I wanted to see, definitely not for my children, right? So I went and wanted to study that further. So I went deeper into the field of education, especially learning disabilities and disabilities, and all that world. And I loved it. Everything I knew about like the different theories out there and the different, systems and models, and everything was really interesting to me. But then it all sort of came to a stop when I had my own child, and I decided that I wanted to take off from work and just stay with her and observe her the first year of her life. And that's where things totally shifted for me.
Yeah. So you were a professor at the time, and then you decided to take a break from that to stay home with your daughter. And what did you discover during those early years of motherhood?
God, I discovered things that, back then her father and our family members thought I was crazy. But I learned from early on as an infant, she knows what she wants, and she can communicate that to me. I knew exactly, since, I don't know, like the third or fourth day, when she wanted to feed and what was bothering her and what she needed and how she sensed people around her. And then that just, as a new mom, I knew nothing about that. Like, I knew education from, ages, I don't know, like 3 and up, but I had no idea what happens in a infant's mind, what is really going on in there. And I just decided to rely on her and just observe her very closely. And of course, there's the love, right? I love children, and this is my own. So there's a lot of love, but then the love with watching what she's capable of as an infant turned into this really deep respect of what children are born with. And that sort of, for me, created this whole, conflict in my head of, oh my God, so I've been immersed in a world that studies and is curious about how we can make children interested and curious and, excited about their learning. Whereas the fact of the matter, they're born that way. They're perfect, like they're perfect in the world where nothing is perfect. They're perfect the way they are. And we sort of, I don't know, over the years, we just came to this concept that they have to be a certain way and that we know better than they do. And they basically, they don't know much. We need to give them a lot of what we have. And it just really shifted my view of, no, they have it. They have all that we want them to have. We just need to be very careful around it. We need to protect it, and we need to nurture it, and we need to provide what they need for whatever they're born with to stay in them and to stay as strong. And at that point, I mean, as a professor of education, I had the privilege of going into schools and observing what's happening. And so I saw things, and then the contrast between what I saw happening in classrooms and what I see my 1-year-old doing at home, it just made me realize there must be something else. There must be a different way of education that I'm not aware of. And if there isn't, then I'll invent one. Like, it's just, like, you have that passion as a mom. I'm not going to let my child go through something I know is really not respectful. And that was the word, like, it's not respectful of what children have and what they're born with. So yeah, that was the story.
Yeah. And so, it's, I think, a similar story for a lot of parents who discover alternative education through sort of responsive parenting and those early days of watching what young children are able to learn and do without direct instruction, by simply being loved and supported. And so what happened next for you? I mean, you realized that you didn't have to invent a new system because this world of alternative education existed, but how did you discover that?
Well, I actually took some time to go back to different pockets in history and learn, especially like certain areas and eras where I knew that learning was done differently, totally differently, and just judging by the results and what was happening in terms of knowledge and learning at that era. So what I learned from looking deeper into those communities is that learning was like the purpose of learning was something different than what we have these days. And then the how people went about it, the principles of learning were also different. So from my research, I learned that trusting the children in those communities back then was really the key. And the examples were plenty of the extent to which people back then really trusted children to know what they wanted to learn. So that was quite exciting for me to know. And then I learned a couple of other principles of how learning was happening. It was more immersed in the community. The community supported it. There were no direct ties to government. There are no imposed curriculums. There are no imposed teachers. It just really came from what the community valued, and then what was important, and then it was left for the child to decide which way to go. And then one of my dear, so I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. This happened like thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, and why are we so far off from that right now? And I was still digging and looking. One of my friends who knew about, if she had a daughter who was actually born the same day my daughter was born, and they were, they used to hang out a lot together. So she knew what I was looking for, and she basically did a quick search, and she found AERO, Alternative Education Resource Organization, and she sent me the link and she's saying, yeah, take a look at this, see if it's, it sounds like something similar to what you're looking for. And that was the shocking reality for me, like being a professor in education for so long. At that point, I think I was, at least I've been like teaching for 6 or 7 years. I didn't know that there was a whole world of alternative education that was out there, millions of people who really committed to it and part of, and it's all over the world. So I started digging into those models, and that's when I learned about democratic education. And to me, that the principle that kids should initiate and direct their own learning, it just really, it resonated so well with my experience as a mom and with what I've learned about those different communities back in in the 11th century. And I just took a deep dive into that world and learned more about it, and starting formulating what the ideal environment for my child should look like in terms of philosophy, non-negotiables, principles, and that's where Pono started.
So tell us a little bit more about that educational philosophy, democratic education, self-directed education. What does that mean?
Well, to me, it meant that really trusting the children to initiate and direct their own learning in pursuit of their own happiness. So it's really all about them. We're just there to support, to love, to provide the resources. To, you know, we have knowledge, right? More than, you know, because we live longer than they have, and so it helping them, like getting the how do I show it? Like the seeds are the kids, their ideas are the seeds of where we help them go. Really have them be in the center. So that's how child-centered and learner-centered education, at least to us, meant. Yeah, so basically they direct, they lead their own learning. We had we had meetings where they would have a big say in the policy of the school, different aspects of the school, how long is recess, how long is lunch, you know, how long is that school day, and we really, really trusted them to, yeah, you know, to trusted to follow them, and we did follow them. And of course, at the beginning, it's like, oh, where is this going? And everything that I know about education was jumping, you know, in front of my eyes. Like that's different from how I know, but how I know, like, you know, schools run. But, you know, many times I needed to just let go and really trust. And I'm really happy that we did, because they are at a place that is really good right now.
So what did Pono look like? Kind of its early days when your daughter was younger, and now she's a teen, and so Pono's sort of grown up with her. But what has been the evolution of Pono from its early iterations to now?
Well, I can tell you the first day, basically there were two kids, my daughter and Toa. He's still with us. And we were at Wave Hill. That was our first trip ever. So we, you know, I remember spending a lot of time looking into really interesting programs for kids. And I found this one on the interconnection between birds and flowers that's given at Wave Hill. And it's like, yeah, great, let's go. So we did go, and we, you know, planned the whole thing, and the kids sat down, and you know, even so that was kind of the philosophy. Like, we do the planning based on what we know that they like, but then you really leave it up to them to lead from there. So we sat in a circle in the garden, really beautiful. The naturalists started talking about birds and flowers, and the kids literally in less than 5 minutes stood up and started walking away from us, and we followed them. So the naturalist and I think the other mom, we followed the kids, and they kept walking into the wild part sort of Wave Hill, and we walked with them, and that's where they really wanted to know. That that's where they were touching things, and like just amazed at what they're seeing on the floor, on the trees, and asking questions, and really being alive and engaged. And we just followed them until literally they said we cannot walk anymore. So we carried them back to the bus. So from that day, we would sit the kids and say, what would you like to do? Literally, like, simply, what would you like to do? And over the years, that question became more sophisticated and developed into a system that we have in place, that we run every quarter. So 4 times a year, everybody sits down and they tell us, but in a more sophisticated way, of what they're interested in. So they come with their list of interests, and we have a system for them where we go from those lists to voting on those lists, to making sure that 70% of the interests of every child become part of the curriculum for the next term. And the kids, I think they started doing that planning with us when they were in 4th grade. Yeah, about 10 years old. When they sat down, they did the budget, they did the search of, you know, places to go, trips, looking for visiting teachers. They did the whole process with us. And and we just kept doing it, and they still do it. They still do it every term, 4 times a year, and they're in high school now.
So from those early days of a kind of toddlerhood, preschool age, when you're doing these excursions, to then the elementary ages when they're 10 years old and they start to take a much more active role in the overall governance and decision making of the program, to now the teen years, what has enrollment looked like? What are the ages of the students who've been involved in Pono? And what does that look like for them in terms of the learning experiences that they've had over the years?
So we started with ages 2. So we had from 2 years old to and sort of different till before COVID. We had from 2 till 13. And then we sort of after COVID, we shifted a little bit and focused on the older ages only. And over the years, following their interest, that basically education to them looked like something really different that I haven't seen anywhere else. So we have structure, like we have a structure. We know exactly what is happening on a daily basis when, they come in, usually like a typical day for a 2-year-old, they come in, they have a snack, and then they have probably like half an hour of doing something with their teacher. Then they go out to the park across the street, and most likely they go to the community garden that's also in the neighborhood, and they, the playground is essential, and then they probably are having a lesson outside or indoors, depending on the weather. And then there's story time. And then there are like different things that are very unusual and have to do with the specific kits, because they asked for those things. Like, I don't know, jumping on balloons. Like, I don't know, like really they like anything that they said as 2 or 3-year-olds, we made it happen. Only if it's really dangerous, then we didn't do it. But anything that they fancy, we made it happen. Like hanging out with Snow White. Yeah, we asked an actress to come in and meet us at the cloisters, and she dressed as like a Snow White, and the kids totally, ran with that concept. So for the younger ones, imagination was really key. The flow of the day is really easy for them. It was tweaked every term based on the kids that are enrolled in that group. When do they get tired? When do they get energized? What do they need at that part of the day? And then they started asking for learning how to read, learning how to write. And that's typically used to be around the ages of 4.5 or 5. And that's only when they ask to learn how to read is when they start working with our literacy teacher. And then that on its own is a totally different program, where she was brilliant at taking them exactly as far as they wanted to go. So she had backgrounds in phonics and in holistic or whole reading. I forgot that word. I think it's called whole reading, holistic. I don't know. I forgot. God, it's a long time ago, it feels like. So she developed her own program that's very individualized based on what the kid wanted. And then the schedule, her program, just the literacy, has its own life of first it's a very individualized one-on-one, and then maybe 2 in her group, and then they grow into joining a group, and then after that group, the focus of that group changes based on their interests. So it's really, really very hand designed, let's say. We set every term, and we look at where they are, and we decide what's next for them. So it's very flexible to accommodate where they are and what they need. And then at the ages of 6, well, from the very beginning, a typical day consisted of basically 3 days of trips and 2 days of being indoor. So the indoor days had lessons on different topics that they wanted. Like I remember they asked to learn about chemistry when they're 5. And our struggle was to find a chemist who's willing to teach some chemistry to 5-year-olds. That has always been our challenge, of the kids asking for things that way beyond and above their age, but then luckily enough for New York City, there were so many people that we could reach out to and find who would come and willingly and teach, car mechanics to 4-year-olds. Like, it's just, they ask for things are very not typical in schools. So I had a whole line in the budget called visiting teachers. We had a lot of people come in. So we really tapped into knowledge, real knowledge in the world, people out there who know things, not us. Because we realized at the age when they were 4 or 6, maybe 5 or 6, whatever I know about a topic that they're asking about is not enough. Their questions were, like, really needed people who know what they're talking about. So that's when we really relied on visiting teachers. Who come in and talk about a topic. And then because we do every term ask the kids what they want to learn about, some of these visiting teachers really were loved by our kids, and they kept asking for them. So that one visit, let's say one yoga lesson became a weekly program till they were in high school, because they just loved the teacher and they kept asking for him to come back. So many things became part of our schedule because the kids kept asking for it, and it became just part of what we do. At the ages of 6 and up, they started asking to go deeper in subjects. And then we started something that we called focus study, where they, let's say baking. They wanted to know a lot about baking. So baking becomes something that they do every week and for as long as they want. And then soon enough after that, they started talking about that they wanted to do projects. And then that became for us something that we called mentorships. And mentorships would be project-oriented learning. So they want to write a book, and they go and do this mentorship for as long as it takes them to finish that book. So focus studies and mentorships are typically like words you would hear in high school, but for our kids, they started at the age of 6. And then we just kept going and really checking in with the kids. So we had interest meetings, we had policy meetings on a regular basis, where we hear from them what they want, where they want to go next. And we luckily had a group of educators who really believed that there's no limit to what the kids can do. And we went all the way. I mean, we didn't have the biggest budget in the world, but we made it happen. And I don't think there are many things that they've asked for that we didn't make happen. We still do, we still drive. And luckily, people are interested in the model, they want to support it. So we got a lot of support from our community to be part of what we offer.
And at its peak, I know things have changed a bit since COVID, but at its peak, how many students were you serving? And what was sort of the organizational structure? Were they homeschoolers? Were you running it as a school? Tell us a little about that.
Sure. So we were certified by the DOH for as a daycare. So we had kids from 2 to 5 who kind of fall under the DOH umbrella as a certified program. And then from ages 6 and up, we started the process of being certified as a non-public school with the New York State of Education. But then it really required meeting some criteria that were linked to budget. So that sort of delayed the process, and we did a lot of fundraising, and we got there. And we really wanted that for our kids. Not for the kids themselves, they didn't care, but for some of the parents, just to know that we are registered with New York State Department of Education. But towards the end of that process, COVID hit, and it just we paused that process. So as a community, the parents and the educators decided that we're gonna basically have the kids registered as homeschoolers because a lot of them do a lot of stuff outside of school or outside of the Pono hours, but we still had them, we had the full-timers be with Pono, but they spent a good part of their days doing other things with their families. So it was okay for them to be labeled as homeschoolers. So that was basically the structure that the community decided to go with. And right now in high school, they are also like they meet with their groups and they at least spend 4 hours together every day. But they also do a lot of things outside with their families, like internships and different things in the city.
And
And
what
at
were the
any
numbers
point,
like? Yeah.
yeah, it was a small school, and we love that it's small school. So at any point, we never had more than 7 kids in a group, and we typically had 3. Sometimes we had 4 groups. So that was basically, so we
Yeah.
never were 30 kids.
So it was a micro school before micro school became so trendy today. And now, so many more families gravitate towards this small, intentionally small, personalized learning environment. And you were already building that and building that with really the city as the classroom, which is what I think is
Yes.
even more spectacular, that you were in the process pre-COVID of becoming identified as a registered private school, even with that outdoor focus. So that flexibility was still possible with this sort of innovative model.
Yes. I mean, it really, definitely was a micro school. And I realized from my experience, like, if you really want to do education that way, it's really hard to do it with more kids. Like, if you really want it to be personalized, and with our system of listening to their interests and making them part of their education, it really needed to stay small. At some point, I think in one group we had 10 or 11, and then we realized even like that's too many. We can't really get to have each of them have the voice of each of them really loud and clear in their education. So we sort of went back to the magic number of 7, and 7 seemed to be just right.
So
Yeah.
I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, Mesa. And of course, I'm personally a big fan of self-directed education. That's the philosophy of education that we choose for our family. And it's definitely one that I hope more families would choose. But I wonder if you could speak to critics who would listen to your creation of Pono and this real focus on meeting children's needs and identifying their interests and finding them resources. And someone might say, well, gee, doesn't that just sound so indulgent, right? You're just giving children all of these things that they're asking for. Does that make them spoiled? What is your response to that?
Uh, no, my response is that this is really, if you look through history and through different times and different communities and different societies, this is what education at best was, when you really provide the opportunities for children to learn what they want to learn, not what we, the experts, the curriculum designers, decide what they should learn at that time and at that point in their lives. So it wasn't we I don't know, like it's not at all spoiling them in any way, because they really were part of the process. It was really more like immersing them in the reality of the world. So if they, one of them came and asked one day, and it's just true, one of our kids asked for learning about fancy equations, mathematical equations. And we had to dig deeper into what does that mean. And when we learned what he meant by that, the fact of the matter, like, he needed to study a bunch of things before he gets to that point. So we're very realistic of, yeah, absolutely, it's a great thing, and we love that you want to do that, but these are the steps that you need to go complete and go over and study until you get to that point. And so we are very realistic with our kids of what can be, what can happen, and how far we can go with their interests. I think a 6-year-old wanted to go to California as part of his interest, and we're like, yeah, not yet. But we started taking them on international trips when they were 10. So and we did say, like, we need all of you to be at a certain age, and we need the approval of the parents, and we think it might happen when you're at that age. So it was really very realistic. It wasn't like, I want to go to, I don't know, ice cream factory every day and we make that happen. We sit down and we say, okay, well, we did go last term, so tell us what else you want to know about ice cream that we did not cover in the first time. And kids are honest, and they're just like, no, I just want ice cream, just, and then becomes, so they're really involved in the real discussions that usually you would hear teachers talk about and the kids are not involved in. The beauty of this model is that they were at the heart of those conversations. They really knew, like, is this an educational trip? Is this a trip that I really, really want? And this community is the community I want to explore that area with, or is this something that should be for my parents to take me to? So and also the role of the others. Like, if you're really, really, really so interested in one area, but we've explored it to the extent where the rest of your group are just like kind of, had enough of talking about, I don't know, trains. So what do we do? What's the next? How do we balance that? So all of these really tricky questions were answered by the children and with the children. And it made it much easier, I have to tell you, Kier, much easier than teaching in all the other settings that I taught before, where we have to figure it out for them and then give them the answer. And of course, like, they don't feel they're part of that answer. So in this kind of model, they were at the heart of things, and they knew exactly like how much money we had, how much money we can spend on each trip, and they figured the details of it. So I don't think it was really spoiling them. It was more really their education was real. They knew all of the different aspects that are involved. And and they had a say. And then the nice thing is that when we make a decision with them, then that's it. Nobody is really objecting, because they know that they were part of that meeting that took 3 or 4 hours, the planning to get to that result. So they're really, I think that in a way contributed to their happiness and content with what we're offering, because they knew what we went through and why we're doing what we're doing and when we're doing it and the reasons behind that. So yeah, they're active participants, very active in the learning process. And the same applies to all of our agreements, behavior agreements. We didn't have anything that was imposed on them. And I think that's, something that also a principle in democratic schools, where we started with 0 agreements, or if you want to call them rules. And every time we have a conflict, we sit down, we have a council meeting, the council meeting ends with an agreement. The agreement becomes, something that we write on the wall, and it stays on the wall until maybe we tried it and it's not working. And so we come back, we sit down and we say, why didn't work, and we revise it, or we say, well, probably we don't need it anymore because that's not an issue anymore. So we still have those agreements on the wall, and they keep changing. But it's them designing it, right? It's them, they're the heart of it. So it becomes afterwards really easy for us to be together, because we just say, remember the agreement that we talked about, and like, oh yeah, okay. So that's basically, nobody's imposing any thing on the kids. It's there, we're just reminding them of the process.
Right. And that's such a key characteristic of democratic education, is that shared decision making, the ability to make rules as a community, to change rules as a community, to enforce rules as a community. And we see that throughout democratic education, whether it's communities like Pono or Sudbury model schools that focus on democratic education, or a whole variety of different kind of educational methods around that. So, what I think is interesting, Mesa, is you said, you went through, your own education, you got a doctorate in education, you were teaching in a college, teachers college at Columbia, teaching teachers in training, and yet had never stumbled upon this notion of alternative education. Why do you think that is? Why don't you think this is a larger part of graduate schools of education?
To be fully honest, because we are preparing teachers to serve in typical traditional schools. And to be more honest, when I'm invited as a speaker to classes that my colleagues are teaching, they would like their students to know that there's something else, but I'm always cautioned as like, don't make them love it, because we're not teaching that. they're not going to end up in such schools. They're most likely they're going to end up in traditional schools. And we know that, it's extremely attractive for them, but to their own benefit. You want you to introduce it, but not really, like not really have them love it. And it's sad. It's really sad because it does exist, and it's that world of alternative education is getting bigger and bigger. And I think maybe now, so maybe now there's more exposure to it, but not much, not really much, not other than maybe a mention in one course about the different models that are out there. But yeah, unfortunately, I think, I think that's it because of where we think they're going to end up being.
I'm hoping that's changing, right? I mean, I feel like especially over the past few years, there's become increasing interest in not only micro schools like what you were creating years ago, but individualized learning. Homeschooling numbers have obviously risen rapidly, remaining at pre-pandemic levels. We have a lot of educators that I have on this podcast who've left conventional schools to launch their own sort of innovative alternative education models. Do you feel like that momentum is building, that this is becoming more of sort of a landing place for, people interested in education? Or do you think it will always sort of remain on the margins?
It's definitely growing, definitely growing when you compare it to when we started. At least it's not so foreign as a concept when you talk to people about it. So it is there. I think COVID helped a lot in showing people what's really happening, maybe parents more of what's really happening in schools. And when people see that, it's hard not to react, especially parents for their kids. I'm really hopeful. I think we're heading in that direction. And I think it needs work. I think it's, the experiences that people have had so far need to be out there, need to be really like what you're doing, Carrie, right? Like we need people to talk about it, to write about it, because it's fascinating and people are going to love it because it really makes sense. And who doesn't want the best for their kids? And when you know that that's an option, of course you're going to go for it. So I guess it just needs to be highlighted more as they're lovely schools and lovely centers, and you want to see what kind of education is happening there because it's really going to change your world. And I remember my first time stepping into a democratic school. I was just amazed at how engaged everybody was. They're really into what they're doing versus the other traditional schools that I went where the teacher is really working hard to get the kids interested. And that it's a huge contrast. And I think it's becoming more obvious for people that there are other options and we can do education differently and still get amazing results, even better results than what we expect. So I'm really hopeful. I think, there is, I think this is the time. I think COVID was a blessing I'm not going to talk exactly how, but it did actually have an impact on us revisiting and rethinking what education we're offering our kids. And there are many, many more such small micro schools. And, better than anybody how many there are out there these days compared to, I don't know, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. So I'm very, very hopeful. I think it needs to be, I think that we can do a lot to make it even bigger.
And one of the things I think is really interesting about your story, Mesa, is that you created a new model. You became an education entrepreneur, and really, I think, are an inspiration for others who want to now do something similar today when there is more openness to this model. But you're also working within the system to try to do what you can, in this case of bringing outdoor education into the New York City public schools. Can you tell us about your efforts there? What does that look like?
Yes. So when I founded Pono, I really didn't think of it being an outdoor school. It's really the kids who led us, listening to the interests of the kids that led us to be out in nature, and then really be out in nature, that at least, or just be outside in the city for more than 50% of the time that they were with us. And that sort of, meets the definition of an outdoor education. So being in the city, yeah, we didn't spend all that time at sanctuaries and in farms, but they were in factories and museums and art studios and dance studios. Like, they were all over. But what I learned through the process of them taking us to nature was that nature is really key for child's development. I never knew that. I never studied that. I came to see it through their eyes and their reactions when we take them out and they're surrounded by just beautiful nature, or, they're very close to animals. And so that grew with the years, Pono, and we had to look into that because that was the interest of the kids, and find what different lovely areas in the city can be really, can offer that connection to kids, to nature. And then over the years, we came across a specific sanctuary about an hour away. It's called Westmoreland Sanctuary, that I love. We've been partners with since then. And that was a totally different experience when you have nature, but you also have naturalists who are really in tune with what kids want and fancy in nature. So our philosophy was expanded into a sanctuary, right, with these naturalists. And the kids just became so connected to being there. Their behaviors, they step off the bus, they're almost different human beings, very relaxed, very at peace, really interested, really fascinated by what nature is offering. So we did that with our kids on a regular basis, all of them, the 2-year-olds to the 13-year-old. They always had that, at least a weekly visit to the sanctuary. And then COVID hit, and for me, just that connection, even like as an adult, I wanted to be at the sanctuary. I like all of us, right? We needed nature. So that the idea came up of okay, what about we offer that for everybody, because not just our kids need nature, everybody needs nature. So we started offering it on weekends to any family interested in the city. And we had a good group of families who send their kids with us. We take them, we travel an hour to the sanctuary. They spend about 3 or 4 hours with the naturals, and then we come back. And just we do that every week or every 2 weeks. And then one of our funders funded a scholarship for that program, and we started offering it for families who couldn't have access to it before. And that really changed for me to see the difference between going to nature, but it's something that you've experienced before. You went on vacations to nature, it, versus going to the sanctuary and it's nothing like you've seen in your life before. And there was something in me that opened. It's a connection to me personally, where I just couldn't. I saw that and I couldn't not take it to the next level. So from that point on, I started talking with schools, and started with schools in Harlem to talk about, let's take our kids to a sanctuary. Let's take them. We have the program. We have everything. We have the transportation. Partner up with us. We will take your kids, and we will basically, we'll do the whole program for you. And all what you have to do is just, try it. So we started a pilot with 2 schools in Harlem, and they love it. The kids love it. They've already signed up for the next year. And basically, to make the funding works, we created a structure where the cost of the program would be covered half by the school and the other half by funders. So in a way, it's a collaboration between the school and the funders, and we're just making, we're the people who are making it work for them. And I think it's a great system because it's great for the schools, and it's great for the funders to know that they're not just, that the schools are really their partners in doing that. So this year be the first pilot year. We're working, so we did it on 2 schools, second graders and high schoolers. And then next year, we're expanding to 20 schools in the city. And we're focusing on, right now, we're focusing on schools in Harlem, public schools in Harlem. So the program basically would take the kids one trip a month to the sanctuary throughout the whole school year. And every time they go, it's totally different. Things are happening in the sanctuary and different program, and they see the same spot, which is beautiful, but they see it change throughout the seasons, and they see how life changes with it. And yeah, I mean, the reaction of the kids are just amazing, of like just always saying how pretty it is, or how they do not want to come back to the city. They just want to be there. They want to teach there. They want to be with the animals, and they want to be on the trails. And yeah, so it's a little attempt to take something that an alternative school discovered, really from the kids, that there's an essential connection between their development and nature. So taking that one element and offering to public schools and to schools everywhere, and hopefully that will grow to cover at least all of New York City. I mean, that's the hope. That's the goal.
What a great goal, and an amazing story again of this this evolution from an alternative school and discovering sanctuaries and outdoor learning through the students, that your children, your learners, and then bringing that to more and more students in New York City and hopefully beyond. So Mesa,
Yes.
if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about your work and your efforts, support some of this work, what is the best way for them to connect?
They can reach out to me directly. My email is pono.nyc, mesa@pono.nyc, or they can look up pono.nyc, and they'll have information there about City to Sanctuary is the program for schools, public schools, and everything else is on our website. Yeah, so pono.nyc, sorry.
pono.nyc. Maysaa Bazna, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you, Carrie, for doing this, for all of your work. I love what you do, and I really, really, really appreciate it. Thank you.